Online conference. This is being recorded and it will be available via our YouTube channel. I'm not quite sure when, but it shouldn't be too long. Next few days, I would imagine. And as most of you know, we're going to meet in Rotterdam starting next Monday or Tuesday, depending on when we're getting there. And I've got a very full agenda planned. Every time I look at my calendar, it sort of makes me take lots of deep breaths and wonder when I'm going to rest, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. And I love interacting with all our international colleagues. Today, we are here for a panel called Who is Responsible? And we have 5 papers that have been submitted that the speakers are going to speak about. And if I could get our speakers to sort of just wave or to let everybody know who you are. We've got Kate Rose. She's up in my upper left-hand corner. Sandra Morello. Esther, is it Greussing? And then Aline. Okay, I have to practice my pronunciations a little bit better. I apologize. Coelho?
Aline Coelho.
Aline Coelho. And then V. Luong. And so we're going to hear from each of them today on some really interesting topics. The way this is going to work is they will present their talk for about 9 to 10 minutes. Then we'll have a couple of minutes of Q&A. And we will move not quickly, but we'll move from one person to the next to make sure all our speakers have plenty of time to share their ideas and get your feedback. So with no further ado, we're going to start with Esther. And I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you very much. Yeah, welcome everyone. I'll share my screen and then we can start right away. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Esther and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Technische Universität Braunschweig in Germany. And today I want to share with you some ideas and reflections that I worked on with Monika Taddicken, who is also in Braunschweig as a professor, and Ayalet Baram-Tsabari, who is a professor at the Technion in Haifa, Israel, on reflections on the cognitive order of society and the question, what happens when AI technology enters the science communication playground? Science communication research, as we know it, has almost exclusively so far conceptualized technology as a channel mediating conversations between humans. But today, however, technology is not only a channel anymore, but it is also a communicator. This means that we have seen several incredible advances in AI over the last days and months and weeks. So I think the keyword here might be large language models and ChatGPT. And we see that technology is designed and also interpreted as a lifelike social actor. So this means that people today increasingly exchange messages with technology in a meaning-making process. So technology not only transmits information as a traditional channel, but people can talk to technology, they can talk to machines, and the machine in a way talks back. And this is what Guzman and Lewis in a seminal piece called Communicative Artificial Intelligence, and communicative AI is also the term that I will use in the next couple of minutes to describe these kinds of AI technologies that step into the role of a communicator and in this sense, step into the role of or step into a role that was previously only ascribed to humans. So I think the relevance of this topic now is rather easy to explain because AI and related communicative technologies are reshaping our information environment. And we see growing levels of sophistication and adoption for both the creation and the reception. And the question that comes up with these new technologies and with these developments is, what happens if communicative AI indeed becomes a new gateway to science communication and is used for information? So that's what Monika, Taddicken, Ayalet, Baram-Tsabari and I are reflecting on. And as I say, we are still reflecting. Well, I can share today our initial thoughts and ideas, because we aim to spark a discussion in the community also, and to understand on the long run the larger implications of emerging AI technologies that take on communicative roles in the context of science communication. So the big question here is, how might communicative AI, for instance, in the shape of large language models, such as GPT, alter the creation, evaluation, dissemination, and reception of knowledge? So taking this rather macro perspective and think about these developments. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is to provide a departure point for discussion, to discuss and on the research side, in the end, to conceptually develop the epistemic roles of communicative AI and to further advance the research agenda on the functions and use of this distinct type of technology in science and its communication. And these reflections draw back to a paper by Christoph Neuberger and colleagues from 2022, where they describe the altered conditions through digitization of public communication. And Neuberger and colleagues, they state that the epistemic roles and hierarchies in society have become more open and flexible, because the negotiation of socially consented knowledge, so of evidence, no longer takes place only in a professional and editorially organized manner, so as we know it from journalism, for instance, but there are new actors that participate in this process. And in science communication, these new actors often are citizens that come in thinking of citizen science. But what we try to reflect on, or what we try to consider here, is that these actors can also be non-human. So these actors can also be technologies, machines, so to speak, AI, communicative AI. And that's what we try to do here. So we take the circle established by Neuberger et al., who say that the generation of knowledge, the evaluation of knowledge, the dissemination of knowledge, and the reception of knowledge, that these are steps that are highly important for knowledge in society. And we go back to these steps and think about and come up with questions that are important for us as a science communication community to reflect on when AI technology steps in. And regarding the generation of knowledge, here, AI brings in the automation of the collection, analysis, and interpretation of big data. So questions that might arise here are, to what extent does AI contribute to scientific understanding? We have, I think with GPT and large language models, this discussion has already started of how can these tools also be used to create knowledge? And I think the interesting overarching question here is also, if AI might be something as an epistemic authority, so maybe on the long run. So to open this question here. On the evaluation of knowledge side, here evaluation of knowledge or knowledge comes back in a way to the training data. So the kind or the training data or the kind of sources that the technology relies on and to disseminate later on to users who use this technology. So here the question is whether there are evaluation criteria built in this technology. So for instance, does the technology has some weighting or some preferences to go for specific sources or to go for specific information to answer, for instance, questions about science. So this evaluation, this inbuilt technological evaluation, needs to be done according to predefined criteria. So here questions are, what criteria indicate valid knowledge? And of course we have ideas what valid knowledge means. We know what is valid scientific research, but the question here is, these criteria need to be readable and interpretable for a machine. So they need to be there in specific forms. And there might be new gatekeepers, such as engineers, who come into this process and who come into the process of evaluating knowledge and deciding on criteria for valid or invalid information. The third step is the dissemination of knowledge. Here the user enters the picture, and we see that that communicative AI technologies, that they have a conversational and also personalized nature. So thinking of voice assistants, for instance, but also ChatGPT, you can really talk in a way to these technologies and they will talk back. So here questions arise, for instance, whether traditional channels such as science journalism gets further challenges, and also questions of how audience expectations for communicating science might change. So will audiences get used to the style of ChatGPT? Will they get used to request information in different styles or in different with different nuances. So here, this is also a question that arises when AI enters the field. So what happens with audience expectations? And finally, the reception of knowledge. This is something that Monika, Ayalet, and I investigate in a project that we have running at the moment, where we focus on the reception and on the user, because on the first sight, it might seem very easy for users to use these tools to get informed about science. But in fact, it's really difficult because it requires specific competencies to properly access, evaluate, and act upon the information that you get as a user. So questions of literacy come up here, but also questions of the perception and use of artificial intelligence. So for instance, the questions whether people actually trust these technologies, and then how trust in science and trust in technology might interact and bring new questions, but maybe also new problems to the table. So this as a quick insight and overview, and the main takeaways for us. We think that it's necessary for science communication research, but also praxis, to be future oriented and to aim for being at the forefront also of technical developments that will change how people get informed about various topics, including science. And we aim to propose human-machine communication as a fruitful theoretical framework to tackle the questions that I have just presented to you, because human-machine communication is a research field that is very interdisciplinary and that is that challenges the traditional anthropocentric approach to communication. So that might help us to provoke the inquiry about what happens when machine systems take on roles previously held by humans, because then maybe science communication research and practice can also inform the development of communicative AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think we have time for one or two questions. Esther, if you would unshare your screen so we can kind of see if anybody, if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to either put it in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to hear your voice. Thanks for the applause, Esther. Well done. Anybody have a question? Julia, yes.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Because I was not sure. Okay. Thank you, Esther, for this, let's say, starting this discussion. But I think that as a researcher, you already have some kind of primary opinion on this subject. So what is your opinion about I would like to ask precisely about this science journalism and versus conversational AI challenge. So is there any challenge that human communicators are doomed to lose against a more sophisticated and more informed tool? Thank you.
This is a very good question, but also a very difficult question, I would say, especially at the moment where this just starts. I could imagine that especially over the next weeks and months, users get very excited about these new technologies. They will use it, they will try them. But I think the key will always be to explain scientific findings as a journalist or as a communicator, and to explain the context, explain how things were produced, how knowledge was produced. So I think I wouldn't say that we are doomed, so to speak, as humans, and that technology will take over, because I think that there are skills and competencies that we have as human communicators that the technology might not take over. But I can imagine that the identity or the role identity of journalists and science communicators might change, so that they will adapt these technologies and they will integrate them in their work. So I can imagine that there will be some change, but I would not say that it will be taken over by machines.
Thank you very much. All right, Petra, I see your hand up, but we need to move to our next speaker. But if you'll kind of make a note of your question, we might have a few minutes at the end to address it. So let's see here. Aline, you are going to be next if you would like to share your screen. And you are still on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you now
That's
hear
okay.
me and see the screen?
We can, and we're excited, yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Aline Coelho. I work for the Brazilian Institute of Metrology, Inmetro, and I will present work done with my teammate Livia Neto, and it's about how to communicate science during polarized elections. Our case in 2022 elections in Brazil. So first of all, what's Inmetro? Inmetro is the National Institute of Metrology, Quality and Technology, and it's a federal autarky acting to help companies to empower national companies, adopting mechanisms to improve the quality and safety of products and services. It was established in 1973, and it works with metrology, conformity assessment, and accreditation. And metrology is the science of measurements and its applications, by the way. About our social media, we have more than 20,000 followers on Instagram, more than 12,000 likes in Facebook, and more than 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. And we had the problem with Twitter of the elections, and we lost all of our followers, and we have to start again. So it was our challenge also. So we have these 4 social media, and we have a YouTube channel, and we had a great challenge during the elections, and I will show you why. In elections, we had the biggest elections last year, and it was the biggest registered electorate in history. We had a great number of new voters. We had extremely polarized elections, despite the multi-party system, and we have extreme right versus left, so it was a really tough political scenario. And we had a lot of cases of disinformation and fake news. So it wasn't a good situation to work in government last year. So, and because of this, the communication secretary of the government, they set a lot of, how can I say, laws or rules for elections, just for the institutions and for the employees. We had a big law with rules for elections. We have a directive about advertising and sponsorship. We had some prohibitions for government officers. And we have another instruction about publicity for agencies and organizations. So we have a lot of rules to follow. For social media, our guidelines were during the closure, possibility of posts that do not fit into the limitations of the legislation, especially publicity, no publicity. You could talk about services, educational content, informative, social guidance nature content, material, just information, no publicity, no propaganda, nothing like this. And the previous posts had to be archived or hidden from the profile. So, and in case of suspension of the main profile, you had this option just to shut down your social media, and we choose not to do this. You could possibly use a temporary one, but for our communication team, it wasn't a good choice. And you couldn't open comments or interactivity to avoid political publicity in your comments area. So it was quite tough. Our Instagram was the channel we choose to let open. So from 29 June and 31 October, our channel increased more than 50%. It was the only one channel who was open. Facebook, who was closed without posts, decreased by 96%. The rate of new followers, not the previous followers. And in Instagram, we had 2,395 new followers. So I think it was a good number. And about our posts in this period, we had 56 new posts in this period, including start and end of election season announcements, talking about the rules to the public. And we had in total more than 7,000 likes, more than 2,000 shares. And we did a formula to calculate the engagement. We used Biancoville to do this. And with this, we could analyze the better content, the better sessions of our content, so we could have some conclusions about what was better and what was not so good to do. The better content was institutional reels about our campus and about our team, talking about the specialties of people, how many PhDs, how many masters we had. So it was the biggest content with 294 points. This content was a content about security, and it had 325.5 points, and it was shared with another institution in Brazil, the Transit Institution, and it was about gas. And analyzing the results of the 56 posts, we had the conclusion that institutional content had over twice the average engagement over the period. The remaining categories has less variation in average engagement, with service contents having the lowest. So institutional had more than 100 points, and the service had less, about 40 points. So it was a quite huge difference. And in conclusion, the three most engaging posts were videos for Reels, suggesting that we can use these formats for strategic and for those who want to expand their organic reach on Instagram. And the three less engaging posts were categorized as services and brought up tips for different situations: lunch on Father's Day, travel with child. For this type of content, the suggestion is to explore new formats. And the highest engaged post in the period was made in collaboration with another institution, illustrating that this is a good way to extend the reach and dissemination of the relevant information. And we saw that it was possible to keep the frequency of content update without violating the electoral legislation, showing that impersonal, technical, scientific, and socially relevant information should be the core of the public communication. It was not observed any change in the profile of Inmetro's followers in social media, and in their interaction with the page after the election results, suggesting that the institution remained shielded from the polarized scenario. This observation, however, needs further study, being an opportunity for the next steps. So thank you. I think that is, and I'm glad to answer any questions, or if you want to send a message later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Aline. If you could stop sharing so we can see the gallery. Does anyone have any questions? Well, if no one else has one, I'll ask one.
Okay.
So, Aline, oh, excuse me. Kenneth, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to know, I know there was misinformation from politics and all that, but I wanted to know, according to their core value, was their communication hindered due to the misinformation or due to the closure of various mode of communication? But that was very nice presentation, and we are learning through the political era to see how we can rectify and improve on our communication. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you repeat the last part of your question, please, just to be sure? The difference.
Yeah, my question was, I know there was miscommunication because of inclination to politics, but I know your organization is not communicating about politics. So I wanted to know, how was your work of communication affected by miscommunication, other than just the closure of the channels of communication? Was there any other way that it was affected? Maybe discussion on politics coming in alongside your work, or such kind of noises?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Yes, there were many difficulties because we had that rules, and we were really committed to follow the rules and to work the way there wouldn't be any kind of question about our content and about our intentions, because I am a civil servant, so I have to work for the organization, but I don't have, and I don't can, and don't want to show my politics inclination. So we had these rules, and it was easier for us if someone asked
Aline, take about 30 more seconds to wrap up, please.
Okay, if someone asked something, put this in the Instagram, or do that, we could use the rules to say, no, we can't, it's not allowed. So of course, there were some pressures, but we could keep in the line maybe. So I think it was easier, but of course, there were many challenges.
Thank you very much. I found that really very interesting, and I do have some questions, so I'll follow up. Our next speaker is Kate Rose. Kate, if you would like to share your screen, I will get you spotlighted. And we can
All
see
right.
your slideshow, no problem.
Perfect. All right, thank you. So my name is Kate Rose. I am an assistant professor at the University of Missouri, and this project that we have been working on with my colleague here, V, who you'll hear about a different project from here in a couple minutes. So in this project, we were looking at trying to break out who people are blaming or holding responsible for environmental issues within a certain region of the US. And so first I want to define the region of focus that we had here. So we were looking within the Mississippi River Basin. So the Mississippi River is a major river that runs across about almost half of the continental US. The Mississippi River Basin actually covers, so the watershed where any drop of water within that basin will actually run into the Mississippi River. So it covers a huge portion of the US. It's really critical for agricultural exports. A lot of agricultural crops and products are grown there. And as climate change has continued to increase the effects of it, then there's been a lot of different issues that have arisen, including that there's been more droughts, more flooding, and it has also contributed to the agricultural runoff that forms a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico from agricultural and some urban runoff that there's too much nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. And so it creates a zone where it kills off a lot of the living things that are in the water there. So this is the context and the region that we wanted to work in. We wanted to look at within this region that is currently facing environmental problems and will continue to as climate change increases. Who are people actually holding responsible for environmental issues? And can we look at some of the factors that predict who they're deciding to hold responsible and how we can hopefully improve communication messages around environmental issues and taking actions to help mitigate some of the impacts. So within the context of the literature, we have known for a long time that there's often this diffusion of responsibility around shared global environmental, especially global, but also large scale regional impacts of environmental issues. This comes down to the tragedy of the commons, that if there's a shared resource, everyone wants to use the resource, but no one wants to be responsible for making sure that the resource isn't depleted and that it's taken care of. Often, especially when we're talking about climate change and other, again, large-scale environmental impacts, there is this disconnect between individuals' actions and their everyday lives and experiences with the global phenomenon or the regional phenomenon that's happening. And this comes down to psychological distance, that it's hard for people to understand, to visualize, to connect their personal everyday life with having a large impact across a much larger scale. So within that context of the environmental impacts within the region, and also this known diffusion of responsibility and this idea that other people are responsible for environmental issues, but I'm not necessarily. We wanted to make do a little more deliberate of trying to figure out who people are holding responsible and what factors are impacting that decision around attributions of responsibility here. So to do this, we conducted a survey of US adults within the Mississippi River Basin. So we focused on the 10 stem states. So these are states that the Mississippi River directly runs through. And so you can see a little bit there on the map of the yellow is the basin itself. And then we have the Mississippi River running through the middle. So we looked at just those 10 stem states, and we had a survey that was representative of each of the states' populations in terms of age, gender, residence, so whether they lived in an urban area or a rural area, as well as their education levels. So we had just over 2,000 respondents in the final sample. And we conducted analysis using a multivariate multiple regression. So looking at all of these different groups they could potentially hold responsible and trying to figure out predictors within each of that. So the dependent variable we looked at, and I'll pull up a slide here in a minute so you can see each of the groups, was to what extent do you think each of the following was responsible for environmental impacts, issues impacting your region. So these are the different groups that we looked at. So right away, notice that people are not holding themselves as responsible for these environmental impacts, that people tend to have others immediately responsible. We had almost 20% said that they were not at all responsible for environmental issues impacting their region, and about 25% saying only a little bit. When you go to looking at society as a whole, there's a much greater responsibility there. And then when we look at organizations and different levels of government within the region too, so looking at local governments as well as federal governments, then people tend to hold the larger organizations more responsible than compared to maybe the local government and as well as the agricultural sector. But overall, they're already pushing the blame, pushing the responsibility for these actions and for dealing with them onto other people and away from themselves. So I know this is a big table here with a lot of predictors. I just want to highlight a few of these that we were looking at. So along the top, we have just 2 of them right now showing. So whether or not they're holding themselves responsible and whether they're holding society as a whole responsible. So the first variable that I want to pull attention to is this idea about concern about the local community, water and health. So if people are more concerned about the impacts within the local community, they're more likely to hold themselves responsible, and they're also more likely to hold society as a whole responsible. We also have an effect of people who have noticed changes in the local environment. So if they responded positive, that they had noticed that the local environment is changing and that there are differences within the local environment, they were also more likely to hold society responsible for those changes. When we get down to different levels potentially of effects and different levels of solutions, then we have a little bit of difference here. So within the idea that the regional environmental issues require systemic solutions, people were more likely to hold society responsible. So if they think that already that it's a systemic solutions are needed, then they're going to hold responsibility for society as general. When we look at individual actions, however, thus related to both seeing themselves as more responsible as well as society as a whole. So those who are seeing the impacts that or having faith and belief in the idea that individual actions can actually mitigate regional degradation are more likely to say that everyone, including myself, is responsible here. And then finally, we have a different impact around the idea of past participation in environmental activities. So if they have already participated in past activities, they're more likely to believe in this idea, and they're more likely to think that they themselves are responsible, and they're less likely to hold society as a whole responsible for that. So individual being connected to having already taken actions, they obviously think that they're responsible, but not necessarily as much within society. So there's a little bit of difference that comes up here when we start to look at different organizations as well as different levels of government. So calling attention to those same variables we already talked about, if they have concern already for the local community's health and water, then they're more likely to hold each of these different stakeholders responsible. So agricultural sector, local government, as well as federal government. We also have, again, an impact within the local government responsibility for noticing changes in local environment. So if they're aware of changes, they're going to hold the local government responsible. And then finally, looking at the difference across those ideas of where the solutions should rest. So are the solutions individual or are they systemic? We again have an impact where if they look more at a systemic solutions, they hold agriculture responsible and they hold the federal government responsible, but we didn't find a relationship there with the local government. And also the idea of individual actions mitigating environmental degradation, that they're more likely to again hold agricultural and the local government responsible, but we didn't find a relationship there with the federal government. So what does this all mean together? So first of all, we had a couple consistent predictors. The first one that I didn't pull out within the chart before, but I think it's worth mentioning, this idea that there was a gender effect across it, that females are more likely to hold everyone responsible compared to males across the board. There's also this idea that of concern about the local environment. So people who are concerned, probably unsurprisingly, are saying that everyone across the board is responsible. So if they're worried about it, they're saying it's everyone's problem, it's everyone's needs to be involved in this. And then finally, this idea about the faith in the impact of individuals' actions and systemic actions. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. So we see that there is a difference in who they're holding responsible based on this idea of the scale of the solution. So if they think that there is this idea that I myself can actually take actions, then they are more likely to hold themselves and not other groups responsible. But there's also this idea that if they see the value in individual actions, then they're holding everyone across the board responsible. So if they think that individuals can have a real impact, then they're likely to say that everyone needs to be involved in this solution. And then finally, if they think our systemic changes are necessary, then they're more likely to view others as responsible than themselves. So there is this idea of the efficacy and the idea that whether or not they are able to have an impact on the environment. So the takeaway I want to focus on here is this idea of potential frames. So we have some evidence here that if we emphasize the necessity of whole system changes, it could lessen personal feelings of responsibility and increase attributions of responsibility for others. However, if we have this idea of emphasizing personal actions, it can potentially help spread the blame across and encourage greater attributions of responsibility across the board. And then finally, this idea of if you're emphasizing local changes in the environment, it may encourage residents to hold society as well as local governments responsible for where we can actually have the impacts. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was, I'm familiar with this area, and so it's quite interesting to me to kind of learn about this, this line of inquiry. Questions for Kate? All right, Kenneth.
Yeah, thank you. I love that study. It's wonderful and informative. I just wanted to look at the relationship between level of being responsible and level of participation in environmental activities addressing issues as what you are looking at. Yeah, because naturally it tends to be, if you are responsible, then you have a higher level of participation in such. But would you shed some light on that, please?
Yeah, so the idea that the level of who they're holding responsible and how that impacts their own personal actions. So I can definitely address that, and then let me know if that didn't quite answer your question. So we do have this idea that that especially for people who are already involved in taking environmental actions, as well as those who view the importance of individual actions, are more likely, probably unsurprisingly, to say, I'm personally taking actions. However, we also have this idea that if people are thinking that it's important that individual actions can actually have an impact, not only are they looking at themselves personally for taking actions, but they're holding other people responsible as well. So I think it gets this idea of saying that not only can I have an impact, so if I can have an impact, then why can't other people? And so they're willing to share that, to share the blame, or to say that everyone else should be taking actions as well. Where we get a little bit more complicated is this idea, if they view the solutions as needing to be systemic, then I think that can have an effect where they're saying, well, my actions aren't going to have an effect, and therefore I shouldn't take actions, and we need to have someone else be in charge of this because my individual actions are not actually going to help.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. As we transition, we're going to go to Kate's colleague, V. V, if you want to share your screen, I will get you spotlighted.
Hey.
And feel free to start.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is V. I'm a PhD student at the University of Missouri. My research interest is journalism studies. Hence, the focus of this paper is how U.S. journalists perceive their role in environmental communication. And I work on this project together with Dr. Rowe that you just hear from. So the reason that we choose this topic is that journalists play a very important role in communicating information to the public. But then there are a lot of argument and critiques from traditional journalist practitioners, also like scholars, about how traditional journalistic norm may conflict with like practices in science communication. For example, the norm of objectivity, journalists need to be unbiased, need to share on-site issues that might make them fall into false balance. And they also the criticize on how environmental journalism is too close to advocacy, and whether or not that should be the role of environmental journalism. So we're looking into journalistic roles defined by Weaver and College that you can see on the left. They listed 4 main roles. First of all, is disseminators, that journalists have the role to share information to the public. They also have the role that interpreters to like analyze the knowledge and then share those data. The role of adversaries, some people associate with advocate to give people the authentic voice, and the role of mobilizer is being a watchdog to criticize, to keep an eye on the government or like other sector. We also acknowledge that journalistic roles have been involved and developed over time, and is more complicated than just 4 categories. As you can see on the right, other scholars have remodeled and reclassified what is the role of journalism, and we want to acknowledge that, acknowledge the involvement of journalists' role. So our research questions, for research question number 1, we asked if how do environmental journalists perceive the value of traditional journalistic norms in reporting, and for research question 2, we specifically asked what roles do they think themselves filling. And we also asked if environmental journalists see themselves as advocates. For our method, we conduct a mixed method with a survey and a semi-structured interviews. We use a convenient sample. There were 10 journalists who was recruited into a training program, and they were placed into 10 different local newsrooms to report on agriculture and water issues. And we use them at our sample. And in the same training program, there are also 7 expert journalists surveyed at mentor. So we want to contrast how early career journalists' perception may be different from the one who in the field for a long time. We already finished collecting data and analyzed the data from the 10 earlier career journalists, and for the 7 expert journalists is still ongoing. But I also want to highlight some demographic information that we have, that half of the reporters have their degree in journalism and communication. 2 of them have a degree in scientific field like environmental science or psychology. 4 of them did not have a degree in journalism or like in science. Regarding years of professional experience, is ranging from less than 6 months to more than 15 years, with a median from up 2 to 3 years. And the experience that environmental journalists also range from less than 6 months to 5 years, with a median of 6 months to 1 year. And I want to mention this information here because the answer of the journalists who work in the field for a long time or actually have training in science communication is more aligned with the expert journalists and more diverged from the one who like just started to join the field. So our first finding is that traditional journalistic norm is still important, but some are adapting to new norm. So as you can see in the graphic, that they all agree that it's important to tell people what they can do to address the issues. There are split between if on-site need to be represented equally, or like if the journalist's role is just to report the fact. There's a divergence that I mentioned, like they adopt to solution journalism, that they say like people might be more interested in solution rather than just telling them the problem. So this also get highlighted during the interview. Several reporters like still stick to the objectivity that they said, like we still need to present on-site the story. If we represent the opposite side, we should have number or like add a contact to back that up, or like to see that like those sides are wrong, but they still think that, oh, we do need to include on perspective. On the other hand, some other people said that they outright said like, no, we should not fall into false balance. We don't need to give them equal representation. If the information is not scientific proof, we don't even need to mention that. So there's a conflict between the old norm and the new norm. Environmental journalists fulfill various roles. So in here, they mentioned that they, all of them think their role is to inform readers. The majority of them also said they motivate members of society to seek for solutions. They also said that their reporting will have an impact on the behavior of people in the region. This graph also highlight more like how they think about the impact of reporting. And because these journalists working in local newsroom, so they think their impact is more in the region and in the local community compared to just make a difference in the world. So through the interview, they also mentioned that they fulfill various roles, and the role of disseminator is the one that get highlighted the most. That they need to inform the public, they need to make the public like understand their surrounding, etc. They also talk about their role of interpret. That is like the second common role that they brought up in the interview, that like they need to find accurate science information, then translate it in a way that like the audience is easier to understand. They also talk about their role at first role to like fact check, to fight with disinformation, address misinformation. For mobilizer, this really relates to the next question about advocate. So why all of them, like in the graph earlier, they said like they want to make an impact, they want other people to get the voice of other people. They very hesitate to associate themselves with advocates or advocacy. Like the quotes here that they said like, I don't think I can change other people's behavior. But on the other hand, some people are just very comfortable talking about solution journalism and what they can do. For the question specifically asking if we asked them if they see themselves as advocate for environment, 6 of them said no, 3 of them said unsure, and 1 of them said yes. And in the interview, they explained more their answer. So for the one who said yes, they said that they, in their personal life, they consider themselves advocates because they do their best to recycle, to like grow more plants. However, they still said that they don't join any advocacy group because they need to avoid potential conflict of interest and withhold to journalism standard. Another example is another journalist that mentioned that because they work in environmental journalists for a long time, they develop a sense of grieving and they become a vegetarian, but they still like, oh, I don't see myself an activist. So for conclusions, environmental reporting evolving slowly. Traditional journalists of value still important, but they are also aware of new values. Environmental journalists are aware of their various roles and they try to fulfill them. Early career journalists tend to not associate themselves with advocacy and activists, even though they do want to make an impact and they believe that their reporting can make an impact. So I think it's also talking to the differences between environmental communication or science communication, and in journalism school, when we teach that, it should be addressed for the new value and not just always stick to the old value. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, V. All right, if you could please, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for V? Any questions for V? Alessandra says there's no questions. The data is eloquent. So make sure I didn't miss anything else. Okay, good. All right, we are going to transition to our final speaker, Sandra. And thank you very much, V. I'm going to unspotlight you now and add Sandra. Let's see, I lost her. Where did she go? There she is. And we can see your slides, and you just need to put them in the full view. Oh,
Sorry.
we lost your slides.
I'm trying
Okay.
to share the okay. Are you seeing it?
We see the slides. If you want it, you're
Are you-
right. Yeah, you're right on that button. There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Wow, fantastic. Sorry, I have a problem. Okay, well,
No
hello.
problem at all. We're ready.
Okay. Hello for everybody. Here we will try to share some thoughts about science and technology museums from Argentina. Astrid Bengtsson, who is my co-author of this work, this paper, is participating here in the virtual meeting. And both of us, we live in Bariloche, in the Patagonia, in Argentina, and in the south of the world. But we think that it is like a problematic concept that in which we are used to speak. And yeah, several years ago, we wrote a small book with Astrid about museums and about the meaning, trying to think about the sense of having museums and visiting museums and trying to engage young people, especially, to visit them. But our reflections about this topic progressed, and today we want to share with you some new questions about the role of the museums. And when we think about science museums in general, we think in this kind of place, or this, or this, or this, or this. No, we have certain kind of classical museums, no, that we recognize in this category. But the question that we have is, what kind of science and what kind of technology is exhibited in these museums? No, this is one of the topics we want to reflect about. When for this, we can use, for example, this Spanish authors which work in the field of science education, in fact, but we can, they analyze didactic materials from schools, from secondary schools, but in which they identify these certain perspectives that they consider as obstacles to understand what science and what technology in fact are, what they really are. For example, you know, and the lack of context sometimes to when you teach a concept, a scientific concept. And if we use these categories, the same categories, to analyze science and technology exhibitions, probably we could recognize several of them. For example, the lack of context for several scientific ideas in the typical science centers is really very common. Or the perspective of progress in technology, no? Or for example, also the idea of the genius in sciences, no? One point that we could say is that in general, science and technology exhibitions are designed by scientists, or at least with the advisory of them. So this leads us to another question, that perhaps scientists themselves, or the institutions or they represent, perhaps they also have a distorted idea about science and technology. But we have another situation, another question, because here, as Latin America, and as a peripheral country in Latin America, now we have another problem with museums, which is another challenge, in fact, is to show decolonized science and technology. we want to say that this is not only means to claim for the objects stored in the central countries and the restitution of the indigenous belongings to their communities, for example, which is this is a moment that is already happening everywhere, in several around the world, in several places. But we think that to decolonize science and technology museums also means to propose a contextualized developments for science and technology, to show the local sciences, to reflect the local or regional problems, and the autonomous solutions based in our own capacities. In fact, authors as Quijano and Mignolo are referenced to think about the colonial turn of our museums, a perspective that is growing also by the hand of a sector of the ICOM, the International Committee of Museums. In the image, for example, we can show a photograph about an intervention in a museum, in a historical and typical museum here in Bariloche, trying to think from the hand of the critical social sciences about for example, the first genocide in Argentina. I think that this kind of reflections help us to rethink about the scripts of our museums. This challenge, we think that it also leads us to think about the necessity to share in museums, in science and technology museums, a science, technology, and society plus environmental perspective, which is interested in the social nature of science and technology. So we think that it's quite impossible to think in this perspective, since from the disciplinary vision that in general is the hegemony is hegemonic in museums. So this make us think what kind of science and technology museum do we need? And this is we think that this is a challenge in the civilizatory context that we have, as the speakers told about the environmental problems. Now we have several problems in our society, and we are in a crisis. So what is the role? What is the role of the museums in this context? From critical museology, we can think that the museums are considered nowadays as a spaces to articulate with the citizenship, to show the problems that we have, to negotiate meanings, about the problems we have nowadays. And well, there are several authors who are working about these topics. And for example, like Giannini and Pedretti that we are showing here, they study several exhibitions around the world to think how and to analyze how the science museums are reshaping their identities and their social goals. And we think that this is the challenge that we have in front of us. And we think that this perspective shows us a way to follow, to give sense to our museums nowadays, in this contemporary context. And just to finish, because I'm just on time, just to tell you that here in Bariloche, we are working in two initiatives, one a small exhibition, an itinerant exhibition about languages, indigenous languages in this perspective, and also trying to create a new science and technology museum in which we are discussing these perspectives. Which kind of museum really do we really need? And well, this is our projects. And just to finish, the reflection shall to say that, well, we want to reaffirm the idea that the museums now are political spaces, but they have to provoke a poetic experience, and that's it. That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone have any questions? We have roughly, 10, 11 minutes left. No, about 9 or 10 minutes. So does anybody have any questions for Sandra? All right, I'm going to open the floor back up. Okay, I'm hearing myself twice. Let me see here. Sandra, that might be me on your, or someone else. Kenneth, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm hearing. I'm going to mute you for a minute. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. I beg your pardon. Zoom can be somewhat distracting. I'd like to open the floor now for questions to the panel. That any questions that might unify us across the different talks and dig in deeper.
I just like to say one thing, because I was thinking about the presentations and thinking about the title of the session, no? About who is responsible. Well, I think that it's an interesting question, and perhaps I think that is interesting to analyze now different options as the another research show. I want I think that this is an interesting point to think also about museums, no? Because scientists are really involved in the designs of the science museums. So, well, this is one thing that I want to remark in this presentation.
Thank you. All right, Petra, I'm going to start with you because you didn't get your question in earlier. So, and then we'll go to Kenneth.
Thank you very much. That's awfully nice of you. I've got a question to Esther. And the talk was about communicative AI. And Esther, you connected ChatGPT and trust. And I was wondering, first of all, how do you think people can develop trust? And when I checked ChatGPT on various questions, I experienced that it lies, that I can't really retrieve the sources where the AI gets the information from, which is quite different from when I do a Google search. Yeah, then I have a direct connection to the source of information, and I can make up my mind whether this is truthful or not. So the question is, with ChatGPT, how can you, do you imagine that people trust it, or should they at all trust it?
Thank you for this question. Yeah, trust is a huge aspect when it comes to AI technology and of course also science, because you're totally right. ChatGPT works completely different from Google search, so it doesn't provide sources at the moment, or if it provides sources, if you ask for sources, they are made up and you cannot track them. So in fact, we are doing a project now where trust is a huge component. So we try to understand, in fact, how people build trust with these systems. And what I can say maybe is that there are, in the literature, there are first examples where the concepts of trust in humans, and especially trust in scientists, so epistemic trust, is combined with trust in machines. So some kind of ideas of a hybrid trust, because at first we have to understand who in fact is the trust object. So who or what are people deferring to when they build trust relationships? Is it the content? Is it the machine? Is it the developer? Is it the company? So there are so many layers, and even that is not clear to us at the moment. So there is a huge line of research that is just starting, and which makes this question very difficult to answer at the moment. But I think a first step is to understand who the trust object actually is.
Thank you very much. Kenneth, your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's also coming almost close to what has been asked about trust and content. And I was just looking at, science centers and science museums. I know the scope at which, or the groups that go to science centers are quite dynamic in terms of diverse at academic level and such, and maybe even non-academic. So at what level should science centers put the background information of science to whatever exhibits and all that? And I know also science centers are coming in to work with the formal education system to add value to what already these learners have been taught. So I'm just looking at what level should we say, yes, we need science centers because they have all the content required for the science exhibits or such, or at what level, and how does trust go hand in hand with, is it the content or is it the fun interactiveness of the science centers and such? Yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure if I understand completely the question, but I like to say that for our perspective, for example, one of the problems of the science centers is that some of them are conceived as places for entertainment. Justice, they are not. They are more like a playground. One problem, and we think that it's necessary to create spaces in which we can reflect about science and technology, not just play. And other problem that we understand that we have with some museums, science and technology museums, is that they are really linked with the schools, with the formal education, or they try to satisfy the needs of the scholar education. But museums are not schools, are another institutions. So of course, this is really interesting to work with schools, to interact with schools in different levels. But I think that it's not necessary to create a museum to help the school to do their task, because there are different contexts. Museums are non-formal spaces for education. They are designated not only for scholars and not for other kind of audiences. I don't know if I respond your question, Kenneth.
No, thank you. Thank you. You've shed more light. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. We're wrapping up, and I just want to express my thanks to the speakers today. I know that there's a lot of work and investment and energy that goes into getting prepared for this experience. And so thank you for that. And thank you for the research you're doing and the contributions that you're making. Hopefully, I don't know if you're online because you can't get to Rotterdam, but maybe we'll see you in Rotterdam. There'll probably be an announcement when this recording is available. Linka, is that true? Will there be, or do you know?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll make sure there's an announcement on Twitter or somewhere. But it should be posted on the PC. Yeah, we'll probably post it on the PCST discussion list that all the PCST network members or anybody that subscribes to the discussion list can get that. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So just make sure you're on the PCST listserv, and you'll get notified. Any final remarks as we close? Anything we've forgotten? All right. Well, I am signing off for us, and I appreciate your time and your participation here today. Thank you very much.